Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that the fragile illusion Martin Richardson has painstakingly constructed around his past is about to shatter with a brutal finality, as Kenneth's ruthless demands ignite a conflagration of fear, betrayal, and desperation. For 2 years, Martin believed he had managed to bury the secret that had nearly consumed him the night he crossed lines that should never have been crossed, the evidence he destroyed, and the witnesses he silenced. But Kenneth, a man as unscrupulous as he is persistent, has uncovered the truth and planted himself like a vulture waiting to pick at Martin's carcass. Demanding $100,000 to keep that secret sealed, Kenneth has given Martin a deadline that approaches relentlessly. And now Martin is prepared to do whatever it takes, legal, illicit, or lethal, to erase the threat once and for all. It begins with a terse email from Kenneth, its subject line devoid of warmth or civility, payment or exposure. The body of the message is succinct: an account number, a time and place for the exchange, and a final warning that failure to appear will result in catastrophic consequences. Martin's initial reaction is disbelief. He stares at the screen, hand trembling around his coffee mug as he struggles to recall whether any trace of his darkest night could still exist. He thought he had covered his tracks: no photographs, no recordings, and the few people who knew were either paid off or convinced to stay silent. Yet Kenneth somehow possesses the leverage to hold him prisoner. Panic surges through Martin's veins, but only for a moment. He is a man who has mastered the art of crisis management, whether in boardrooms or at private gatherings. His outward calm returns quickly, a steel blade beneath a polished veneer. He knows that to show vulnerability is to invite further extortion. He forwards the email to Vernon with a curt note: "We have a problem." Vernon, ever the loyal lieutenant, immediately grasps the gravity of the situation. He calls Marcel Malone, Elon Hawthorne, Joey Armstrong, and even Martin's own father, Ted Richardson, into an emergency meeting at Bill's legal officia neutral ground where they can strategize without risk of leaks. Bill's office, bathed in late afternoon light, becomes the war room. Stacks of case files crowd the dark oak conference table, but none so urgent as the single manila envelope marked with Kenneth's digital signature. Marcel, the strategist of the group, leans forward. His crisp suit and steely gaze belie a mind that shuttles through worst-case scenarios at lightning speed. "If Kenneth has real evidence, we're in serious trouble," Marcel warns. Paying him off is only a temporary solution. Will come back for more. Joey, the wild card with a penchant for risk, smirks at the notion of continuing payments. "Let him come back," Joey says, voice low but excited. "We'll handle him." Their eyes flicker to Elon, the tech-savvy conspirator who had once developed an app that tracked personal data for the highest bidder. Elon nods gravely. "I can trace and disable any communications he uses, but if he's holding something physical, documents, photos, recordings, we'll have to recover or destroy it." And then there is Ted Richardson, Martin's father and the one man whose unwavering love has both protected and burdened his son. Ted's lined face is drawn tight with concern, but his eyes hold that familiar spark of determination. "We need to find out exactly what Kenneth has," Ted says quietly. "Then decide. Do we negotiate, neutralize, or eliminate the threat?" Bill, who has served as Martin's legal counsel for years, pushes a stack of medical reports and police affidavits aside. "Gentlemen," he says, voice steady, "we must consider the legal ramifications. Murder is not a practical solution." A hush falls over the room, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Martin leans back, his gaze distant. The outlines of his controlled universe blur for a moment as the weight of what he might have to do begins to sink in. 2 years ago, he made choices that crossed moral boundary, choices he believed justified by necessity. He destroyed evidence of a violent altercation, convinced witnesses to fabricate stories, and allowed a man to take the fall for a crime he himself committed. All of it to protect his reputation and the empire he was building. Now a single man stands between him and complete ruin, and that man wants $100,000. Martin's jaw tightens. He doesn't want to pay. Not because he can't afford it, but because he sees the payment as a shackle, a sign of weakness that invites further demands. Vernon leans forward, fingertips pressed together in thought. Martin, he begins, we could stage a retrieval operation. Elon can hack Kenneth's phone, trace his location. Joey and I can handle physical extraction of any incriminating materials. Marcel, you coordinate. Martin's chest tightens at the thought of violence, but he recognizes the logic. If they can seize the evidence, whatever it is, that we remove Kenneth's leverage. Ted nods in agreement. If we neutralize the physical threat, we control the narrative. Bill interjects a cautionary note. We opt for that route, and we risk it becoming a deadly raid. Any fatality or evidence of a break-in will land us all in prison. The best path remains negotiation. At that moment, Martin's composure snaps. He stands, voice ringing through the room like a gunshot. No more talk about negotiation, he snaps. I'm not throwing another cent at that leech. If he wants blood, he's going to get it this own. The room falls silent, each man digesting the transformation of their usually measured companion. Ted rises, stepping between Martin and the table. Son, calm down, he says in a low voice. We will handle this. I know you feel cornered, but rage will get us nowhere. Martin glares at his father, chest heaving. When he speaks again, his voice is thick with emotion. You've known about my secret all along, haven't you? Every time you looked at me, you knew what I did. Ted's shoulders slump with the weight of confession. I learned shortly after you thought you'd covered your tracks. I've been trying to protect you, as any father would. Martin's face twists with betrayal and relief. Protect me? By letting me drown in lies? By letting Kenneth get this close? It is Vernon who intercedes. Martin, please. We do this together. We will retrieve the evidence, and Kenneth will never bother you again. But Martin is beyond reason. He spins on his heel and storms out of the office. Ted follows, calling after him. Martin, wait, we'll talk. But Martin does not stop. His mind races, torn between hatred for Kenneth, guilt over his own actions, and the sting of his father's silent complicity. Outside the building, Martin's rage boils over as he paces on the sidewalk. Cars blur past in the evening traffic, oblivious to the man teetering on the edge of violence. His phone buzzes in his pocket, an incoming text from Vernon. We have a plan. Trust us. Martin doesn't respond. Instead, he dials Joey. The line crackles. Joey, meet me at the docks in 20 minutes, he says. Alone. Then he ends the call and dials his father. Ted, I'm coming home. And when I get there, I want you to stay the hell out of my way. He hangs up before Ted can object. Meanwhile, Bradley Smitty Smith is conducting his own investigation. A private investigator turned reluctant conspirator, Smitty recalls the night Martin's secret was revealed with a clarity that unsettles him. He sits across from Jacob Hawthorne at a quiet booth in a downtown diner, the glow of neon signs casting shifting colors across their faces. He recounts what he witnessed, Martin arriving home in a different suit, shirt untucked, eyes red as though he had been crying or worse. I thought he'd been in a fight, Smitty admits, stirring his coffee. But the whole thing felt off. Jacob, Elon's younger brother, leans forward, disbelief and dread mingling in his expression. Martin changed clothes? Jacob asks. Why? Smitty shrugs. Beats me. But whatever happened that night, someone freaked him out so bad he had to scrub himself clean. He wasn't just hiding evidence, he was trying to wash away something in himself. As Smitty lays out the timeline, Martin's phone activity, the suspicious trip to the industrial district, the hurried exit from a seedy hotel, Jacob's eyes widen. If Kenneth's got dirt dating back to that night, it's probably personal. Embarrassing stuff. Maybe worse. Smitty nods. He's connecting dots. He's pieced together the night you all thought no one remembered. Jacob's face pales. We have to stop this, he says. Before Kenneth demands more money, or worse, before he goes public. Smitty pushes back his chair. I'm on it. I'll dig up every transaction Kenneth's made, every location ping from his phone. We'll know where he is and what he's planning next. Back at the Richardson estate, Martin slams the door behind him and strides down the hallway, anger rippling with each step. Ted follows quietly, worry etched into every line of his face. Martin stops in the center of the living room, eyes blazing as he turns to his father. I won't be manipulated anymore, he says. Kenneth thinks he can scare me into paying. But I'll give him something to be scared of. Ted steps closer, gently placing a hand on Martin's shoulder. Let us handle it, he says quietly. You don't have to face this alone. But Martin shakes off the touch, pain and fury mixing in his gaze. When you found out what I did, you should have stopped me, he accuses. Instead, you covered for me and now Kenneth has me by the throat. Ted's voice trembles. I did what I thought was best to protect you. Martin whirls away and heads upstairs, tossing his jacket onto a chair. Alone in his room, he looks at the framed photographs lining his dresser, images of milestones and achievements, all built upon the foundation of a secret crime. His reflection in the mirror shows a man on the brink, eyes hollowed by fear, mouth set in a grim line. He thinks of Kenneth, imagining the smug satisfaction on that man's face as he counts out the dollars that will seal Martin's fate. He thinks of the others, Vernon, Marcel, Elon, Joe, each bound to him by the same blood oaths and blackmail. And he thinks of his father, whose love has both sustained and betrayed him. In that charged silence, Martin Richardson makes a decision. He will reclaim control, no matter the cost. He will confront Kenneth on his own terms, wielding violence or intimidation if necessary. He will refuse to be the victim of extortion. And in doing so, he plunges himself further into a moral abyss, a dark journey that will test the bonds of loyalty, expose the depths of his own capacity for cruelty, and force each conspirator to confront the consequences of their silence. The night stretches ahead, heavy with the promise of confrontation. Martin's footsteps echo down the hallway as he heads for the door, each thud a heartbeat of reckoning. The stage is set for a final reckoning, one that will determine whether he emerges victorious or is consumed by the very darkness he sought to control. The sky was a bruise of deep indigo as Martin Richardson pulled his car into the deserted lot near the docks. The salt-tinged wind carried an ominous promise, stirring the tar-paper rooftops and rattling the creosote-soaked pilings. Martin's heart hammered against his ribs, but this time it wasn't fear of Kenneth's blackmail that propelled him. It was cold, determined rage. He stepped from the vehicle, each footfall echoing against the concrete apron, and breathed in the night air as if steeling himself for battle. The plan was simple: confront Kenneth, retrieve whatever proof he held, and ensure that the man who'd tormented him for months would never trouble Heimer, anyone connected to him again. A solitary street lamp cast a pool of jaundiced light over the loading ramp where Joey Armstrong and Marcel Malone waited, their silhouettes tense. Vernon lingered at the edge of the glow, scanning the water for any sign of Kenneth's speedboat or hired muscle. Martin strode toward them, shoulders squared and jaw set, the weight of his father's disappointed words still echoing in his mind. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came when he stood at the edge of chaos, the same cold rush he'd experienced during countless boardroom showdowns. Only now, what hung in the balance was more primal: his freedom, his reputation, and the fragile loyalty of every man who stood with him. Joey offered a curt nod. Marcel slipped a small pistol into Martin's jacket pocket, the metal cold against his side. Elon's got the tech in place, Marcel murmured. Kenneth's phone has been geofenced since he's within range. We'll know exactly where he is and what he's saying. Martin closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Kenneth's smug expression as he poised over his keyboard, fingers dancing across the keys to send another threat. I want him scared, Martin whispered, more to himself than to Marcel. Make him think he's walking into his own funeral. Vernon glanced toward the dark silhouette of the warehouse at the end of the pier. He's in there, Vernon said, voice low and steady. Two men guarding the entrance, and Kenneth's pacing inside like a caged rat. The men exchanged a look. This was no longer a simple meetup. Kenneth, arrogant and dogged, had clearly anticipated a trap. If bloodshed was to be avoided, the next few moments would have to be executed with absolute precision. Martin approached the warehouse door with measured steps. He pressed a finger to his earpiece. Elon, he whispered. A brief crackle, and then Elon's calm voice. Kenneth has 2 phones running on different networks. He's just moved into the adjoining room. Security cameras at every corner. I'm looping the footage. You have a 3-minute window before the feeds reset. Martin's pulse quickened. 3 minutes to breach the warehouse, locate Kenneth's hidden files, digital or physical, and leave no trace. To fail was unthinkable. To succeed would mean the end of this nightmare. Joey and Marcel fanned out to cover the perimeter, while Vernon shadowed Martin's flank. The heavy steel door creaked as Joey forced it open from inside, and a flood of stale air rushed out. Kenneth's 2 bodyguards, large men with shaved heads and tattoos snaking up their arms, spun at the intrusion, surprise flickering across their faces. Martin didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, the pistol at his hip, and aimed at the closer guard. A single shot rang out, precise and muted by the suppressor, and the man collapsed without a sound. The second guard reacted, but Marcel closed the distance with brutal efficiency, disarming him and pressing a knee into his ribs until he gasped for breath. Vernon bound the man's hands with zip ties, then checked the perimeter for further threats. Martin's eyes adjusted to the dim light. Wooden crates and metal shelving lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood Kenneth's battered laptop, perched atop a folding table stained with grease and coffee rings. A tangle of charging cables snaked toward an unmarked safe in the corner. Kenneth himself crouched near the table, a cold smile spreading across his face as he pressed a flash drive into a small hidden ATM-like slot in the safe's door. I knew you'd come, Kenneth rasped, his voice twisting with triumph. You think you can scare me into silence, but you're too late. The evidence is already in the hands of people who won't be intimidated. He straightened and reached for a pistol at his ankle. Martin raised his weapon in a fluid motion. Step away from the safe, he commanded. Right now. Kenneth's smirk widened, and he leaned back slowly. You could shoot me, Kenneth taunted. But what then? You still don't know where the backups are. I've sent copies to multiple locations, cloud servers, an encrypted drop, physical mailboxes. Even if I die here, the truth of your crimes will find its way onto every screen in town. The bravado crackled in the air, even as Martin felt it stir his own blood. He realized Kenneth had prepared for a contingency plan designed to ensure that any attempt to silence him only amplified the threat. Marcel moved a step forward, his eyes fixed on the safe. He's bluffing, Richardson, Marcel hissed. If he's moved the drives, he'd be copying files, not taunting you. We take him now. But Martin thought of the world that lay beyond these grimy walls. His father's face, the mixture of pride and sorrow he'd worn when Martin's secret first came to light. He thought of Bill, whose faith in Martin was fraying by the day. And he thought of Smitty and Jacob, piecing together the puzzle in the shadows, their own loyalty about to be tested. Killing Kenneth here would solve one problem, but birth 100 more. It was a moment of cold calculus, violence or compromise, truth or illusion. Taking a slow breath, Martin lowered his pistol slightly. Okay, he said, voice steady. You win the standoff. Kenneth's smile flickered with triumph. Hand over the key, he said, nodding toward the safe's combination lock. With a click of the tongue, Martin turned to Vernon. Disarm him, he ordered quietly. Vernon advanced, hands moving to secure Kenneth's wrist. Kenneth shrieked, jerking back, but Vernon's grip was iron. In one smooth motion, Marcel snapped a pair of handcuffs onto Kenneth's other wrist. The ratchet locks bit into his skin, and Kenneth glared at Martin with loathing. Martin approached the safe, fingers trembling as he dialed the combination of code he'd bribed Kenneth's assistant to reveal weeks before. The tumbler spun, and at last the door swung open. Inside lay a small box padded with foam, and within it, 2 flash drives, their labels etched with cryptic codes. Marcel swept them into his pocket. "That's it," Marcel muttered. "We have them." But Martin's attention had snapped back to Kenneth, whose face was flushed with anger and fear in equal measure. "Don't think this ends here," Kenneth snarled. "I'll still have backups, and people will know. You can't erase the past." Martin crouched so that his face was level with Kenneth's. The glare from the street lamp filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating the cold fury in his eyes. "You misjudge me," Martin said softly. "You should have stayed in the shadows." He stood abruptly, signaling to Vernon. They dragged Kenneth out of the warehouse, jamming his bleeding hands into a battered chair beside the railing overlooking the docks. With a nod from Martin, Vernon shoved a wad of duct tape across Kenneth's mouth and bound him to the chair with heavy cords, ensuring he couldn't call for help or sabotage the drives. As Martin surveyed the scene, Marcel knelt beside him, whispering, "We need to decide what comes next. Do we warn him that we have his copies? Do we take him somewhere else to explain?" Martin's jaw clenched. He imagined the sensation of watching Kenneth's world collapse, the man's smug certainty replaced by abject terror. And then he thought of the moral abyss into which he would plunge if he allowed himself to savor such vengeance. This had to be about survival, not satisfaction. "We'll let him believe he still has leverage for now," Martin decided. "Then we'll erase every trace he has left." Marcel nodded, though his eyes betrayed disappointment at the absence of finality. Vernon stood at a distance, watching the frozen figure of Kenneth. "What if he dies here?" Vernon asked. "Exposure, hypothermia. This place isn't exactly safe." Martin stepped back, folding his arms. "Then he dies," he said, tone flat. "His body will be found, and the story will be that he tried to extort a rich businessman, threatened him, and paid the price." He paused, considering the weight of his own words. "No one has to know it was for real." The men exchanged nods, each understanding the unspoken pact. They had all crossed lines tonight, but they would emerge unblighted if they told the story right. Elon's voice crackled in Martin's earpiece. "Kenneth's phones are offline, GPS disabled. He can't call for help." Martin allowed himself a grim smile. In the half-light, he felt the icy taste of victory. Yet beneath it, a gnawing unease. Each step he took further into darkness chipped away at the man he once was. With the drives in Marcel's pocket and Kenneth bound for at least another hour, they loaded into the waiting Carbill's black sedan, its engine purring like a watchful beast. As Martin settled into the back seat, he glimpsed his father's face in the rearview mirror. Ted Richardson, staring at him with a complexity of emotions Martin was too exhausted to parse. There was pride, yes, but also fear and sorrow, an acknowledgement of how far his son had fallen. Bill sat beside Ted in the front passenger seat, the lawyer's calm demeanor a fragile mask over his worry. Martin knew Bill was grappling with his own disillusionment. Had he been complicit in murder, even if indirectly? Had he believed in the wrong man all along? The drive home was silent except for the hum of the tires against the asphalt. Martin stared out the window at the flicker of streetlights, each light a small beacon in the dark, an illusion of safety in a world where trust had proven as flimsy as paper. His thoughts went to Smitty and Jacob, diligently weaving together the strands of that fateful night 2 years prior. He wondered whether, in stripping Kenneth of his leverage, he would also be destroying the final shred of anonymity that protected his secret. If Smitty had suspicions, they would now collide with Marcel's sworn silence and Ted's paternal loyalty. Would it be enough to bury the truth forever? When the car turned onto the long driveway leading to the Richardson estate, Martin felt the familiar walls of his home closing in around him. It had once been a sanctuary of achievement and comfort. Now it loomed like a gilded cage. The garage door opened at Vernon's signal, and they filed inside, each man acutely aware of the gravity of what they'd done. Inside the house, Ted slipped away quietly, heading to his study, a small fortress of books and family photographs where he would sit in the dark and mull over how to preserve his son's legacy without becoming an accomplice to murder. Bill lingered by the foyer, running a hand through his hair, clearly torn between relief that the immediate crisis was over and the recognition that the crisis had changed everything. Martin climbed the stairs alone, the subdued lighting guiding him toward the master bedroom he shared with his wife, unaware that his marriage teetered on the brink of collapse. Past midnight, the house was hushed. Even the security cameras, looped by Elon's deft hacking, seemed to whisper in the silence. Martin entered the bedroom, the leather-bound documents he'd once prided himself on now feeling like instruments of deceit. He unclasped the safety deposit box from his nightstand where he had stashed keys to offshore accounts and proof of Kenneth's earlier payments and set it on the bed. His hand hovered over the lid as memories of that first transcript from Kenneth, the initial demand of $50,000, the threat to leak Martin's involvement in a fatal car accident disguised as a drunken misadventure flooded back. Tears stung at the corners of his eyes, not for Kenneth's threats, but for the realization that the cost had never been monetary alone. Each payment had extracted a piece of his soul. Each secret guarded a brick in the wall that separated him forever from the innocence he'd once known. Now he had reclaimed his freedom, at least for tonight, but at what cost? He was no longer the man who had entered these rooms years ago with dreams of prestige and power. He was a man forged in shadows, haunted by choices that would never be undone. Below, the strains of music drifted faintly from the study, where Ted and Bill conferred softly. Martin closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, "It ends here." And in that vow, he felt the weight of destiny shift beneath his feet. The path ahead would demand more than cunning and foresight. It would require him to confront the moral abyss into which he had plunged and decide whether redemption was possible or whether he would be forever bound by the ruthless acts he had committed in silence. The choice was his alone, and in the fragile stillness of the night, Martin Richardson vowed that no matter what came next, he would face it on his own terms.